Okay, so we would now be moving on to the next session where we have an exciting panel of distinguished scholars and speakers. This panel would be moderated by Dr. Jyoti Sabharwal, Professor, Department of Germanic and Romance Studies, University of Delhi. May I now request Professor Sabharwal to introduce to us the distinguished members of this panel. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right. Since morning we have been
Jyoti, we were being able to hear you and suddenly your voice is gone, or is it only for me?
I can hear you. I just log in again. There's something happened.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm back. All right, then thank you very much for the Department of German Studies, University of Mumbai, for initiating this wonderful centenary celebration of Siddhartha. Centenary celebrations, like it happens in human lives, are markers in the life of a book to reflect on its content, form, and reception, and assess its contemporary relevance and projections for the future. Now I have the honor to introduce to you a panel of 7 scholars, and they will share their perspectives with us. And after that, each one will speak for about 5 minutes. After that, the discussion will be open to the audience. And now I shall start by reading out the bio notes of the panelists, which are purely in an alphabetical order. I start with Professor Anil Bhatti, who doesn't need any introduction. Professor Emeritus, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He taught at the Center of German Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And amongst many other achievements, which very modestly he hasn't mentioned, the latest is the Research Prize Award from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. After that is Professor Anakutti Findeis. Anakutti William Mangalam Kurian Findeis, former head of the Department of Foreign Languages, University of Mumbai, completed her bachelor's degree from Banaras Hindu University with the first rank and a gold medal, and her master's in philosophy as well as her master's in German literature from BHU. She pursued her higher studies in modern German literature from the University of Vienna and completed her PhD in the same subject from the University of Salzburg. She has worked as a lecturer and reader in German at BHU for 15 years before taking charge as professor and head of Department of Foreign Languages at the University of Mumbai. She was also the vice president of Literature Forum India in Germany. She has several publications to her credit, which include publications on Hesse's Siddhartha, as well as a collection of poems in the Temple of Words, Grimm's Fairy Tales, in German and Hindi translations, several Malayalam poems and their translations into German. After this, we have Professor Ingo Cornels. Ingo Cornels is Professor of German Studies at the University of Leeds in the UK. Areas of expertise include German literature and culture in the 20th, 21st century, utopian thought, science fiction, German student movement, 1968, Romanticism, Hermann Hesse, German current affairs, Zukunftsbewältigung. He is the author of Writing the Revolution, the Construction of 1968 in Germany, 2016, and Beyond Tomorrow, German Science Fiction and Utopian Thought in the 20th and 21st Century, 2020. Together with Dr. Neil Cunningham from the University of Tokyo, he is currently editing the volume Hermann Hesse's Global Impact, Past, Present, Future. This volume is due to be published with Camden House in 23-24. So it will be much awaited, this work. After this, we have Rosie Singh from the Jawaharlal Nehru University. After completing her PhD on Franz Kafka from the Center of German Studies in 1996, Dr. Rosie Singh joined Delhi University. In 2016, she joined JNU, where she teaches German literature at the Center of German Studies. She has published research articles on Rilke, Kafka, Handke, and Manto, among others. Then we move to Pune with Swati Acharya. Professor Swati Acharya, teaching at the Department of Foreign Languages, SPPU, has many years of teaching experience, taken over as coordinator German section in 2019, and currently is also head of the entire Department of Foreign Languages since January 2022. Areas of research interest are contemporary German literature, images of India in German-speaking literatures, culture studies, translation studies, literature and film, migration, literature, and film. She is the recipient of the fellowship of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. Now we move to Hyderabad. Nishant K. Narayan is from FLU. He has been working there as assistant professor at the Department of German Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University since October 2010. He has studied at the Center of German Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and has several publications to his credit. His current research interests include German as a foreign language, text linguistics, and contemporary German literature. And the seventh person on the panel is Shruti Jain. Dr. Shruti Jain is an associate professor at the Global Languages Center, O.P. Jindal Global University, Sonipat, India. She completed a PhD at the Center of German Studies, JNU, New Delhi, on the Indian reception of Friedrich Nietzsche. Her areas of interest are language teaching, literary theory, German literary history, religion, philosophy, and Indo-German cultural encounters. During her PhD, she received a DAAD scholarship, that's the German Academic Exchange, to visit the Humboldt Universität of Berlin from 2007 to 2008. Dr. Jain has delivered lectures at various Indian universities and conducted teacher training workshops for school and university teachers, presented papers at international conferences, and published articles in the field of cultural studies and teaching German as a foreign language. Now, I request Professor Anil Bhatti to share his perspective with us on Siddhartha.
Thank you, Jyoti, for this introduction, and I thank you very much for this invitation. I can't say much, of course, as you probably will realize, but a few thoughts did occur to me. See, Hesse, strange enough, has an odd existence in our academic world. As students, as colleges, the center of interest as far as German literature was concerned, and as far as I was concerned. Damian was exciting, as many other representatives of German literature, but Siddhartha was, in some sense or the other, not very interesting. It was about India, something one thinks one knows about. And in Germany itself, my generation, Hesse Siddhartha was not very important, at least for the discussion which went on modern literature, on contemporary literature, on, shall we say, the exciting literature of that time, which would have probably been either Brecht or somebody like Rilke, would have been much more interesting. Sorry for the slight breathlessness. That's just part of the evening. But this changed This changed to a great extent with the student revolution in Germany. And of course, it has already been mentioned by your speakers, the rise of the hippie movement and its influence in in European student movements. See, that's a very important point, is that the kind of interest which started with Hesse in the world and made him to a world famous author, a Surkamp author, was the kind of interest of my generation was not really interested. India was third world. And to deal with the third world, Siddhartha was not the appropriate writer. This changed to some extent the realization that Hesse was an eminently political writer. In a very perceptive review by Hans Meyer, noted German philosopher, writer, and critic, the letters of Hesse and Thomas Mann were compared, and Hans Meyer himself, a very distinguished academic and critic, pointed out that Hesse was the more political person than Thomas Mann. Normally, I would have thought it's the other way around. After all, Thomas Mann wrote that famous pieces from his exile period, and so did Hesse, right? But Thomas Mann would have been considered the more political person. This was underscored very strongly by the discovery that a very great political writer like Peter Weiss, who wrote the Aesthetic des Widerstands, was a great, shall we say, an admirer of Hesse. Weiss had left his home country to go into exile, and a very important part of his own development. Now, the point that I took from this was that I misunderstood the Hesse, and that he actually reads him through different eyes. And Hesse, the political Hesse, was a discovery which I think I'm very happy about, because then, in a roundabout sort of way, I came to Siddhartha and to Hesse by reading the Glasperlenspiel, which I think is the most important book that one could read if one wants to understand politics and life in 20th century Germany. So Hesse, as the author of Das Glasperlenspiel, was the important medium through which China, India, fascism, Weimar, authoritarianism, individuation, all came in some very peculiar way to be. And apart from that, of course, the language. Hesse's language was a discovery. It was Hesse was somehow or the other underrated as from the point of view of modernists. But Hesse's language becomes very, very important to you if you start reading Das Glasperlenspiel and the role that the Chinese figures, the Indian figures, and whole life plays in it. So in that sense, you might say that one reaches Hesse through making one's own political journey from an India which, as many of you have said, is not really known or known in sufficiently, to an Asian world of China and India, which was a discovery of the West, but is now becoming gradually taken more seriously, and it is realized to what extent these discourses have influenced our own intellectual development. So, to a young person who's starting to read German, I would still say, yes, start with Damian. That would be interesting you. But somehow or the other, in your own way of thinking and academically writing, do try and have a look at what Hesse did say and start then with the Glasperlenspiel. Siddhartha is a more difficult work. It's my peculiar impression that I picked it up because of this symposium, that it is actually quite a very, very difficult work, because you're tempted so much to try and interpret every sentence that is written there that you actually miss the fact that it is the difficulty of the language which by trying to be simple becomes more difficult. And it is that achievement of modernism which I think is a good lesson to take. There are difficult writers, they're difficult from the start. There are political writers who are political from the start. Take Brecht, for example. And there are other writers who are simple, apparently, but actually very difficult, both politically difficult and also in terms of language. Really very difficult until you decide that it's through the difficulty that you reach the essential simplicity of their writing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Professor Anakuti, would you please take the mic now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Or yeah, am I loud enough? Can you hear?
Yes, I can. We can hear you and we can see you also.
Thank you. I am sitting.
Nice to see you after so many years.
Even I, and I'm so delighted to see all my colleagues, my friends, what should I say? I feel at home, and I'm sitting here outside. It is snowing so much and so cold. I'm wrapped up, and I can understand India is my highway land. So that in that mood, I am sitting here. Well, thank you so much, Vibha, Meher, and the excellent team of Mumbai for this invitation and for this symposium. I must say, done so well, well planned, well structured. I can only say bravo. Thank you for inviting and for the chance to be here. Well, I want to say that maybe it is because of my study of philosophy, both Western as well as Indian philosophy, from the Center of Advanced Studies in Philosophy in Banaras Hindu University, that I must say, when I read Siddhartha, it was a great joy for me. It was food for thinking further. And besides, I was so glad to see that a Westerner, a writer, so open-minded and inclusive and thinking, discovering Asia, discovering India and the philosophical thoughts, the philosophical schools, not only one, but having a pilgrimage through the Indian, let's say, landscape of religions and philosophies. That impressed me, I must say. I read later on Glass, Perlenspiel, as different to my esteemed colleague, Bhatti, I would say I found Glass, Perlenspiel more difficult, and Siddhartha was, for me, a kind of, what should I say? I thought so. It is a good stuff for youngsters, young students who are dealing with German to understand and to read and to have the joy of at least understanding some sentences, even if not the entire philosophical background of it. That was my experience. So I introduced, even in Mumbai in the 1990s, Siddhartha, when we envisaged an intercultural study of German. And this was the first text which we introduced. I hope some of the students might think of it. Well, now, when I'm given 5 minutes, I get very nervous what to say and what not to say. So first of all, my misconceptions. I was thinking the talk or the dialogue has to be in German. So I prepared, forgive me, I probably didn't read your program so exactly. So I had prepared some notes in German first, but then hurriedly I have summed it up into English. But to have some substantial thing, I have sent to my colleague Meher a poem which I have, as a response to the theme Siddhartha now and then, sent. So that's something bliped, something remains. So I was thinking to say about the reception of Siddhartha or Hesse in Indian context. I shouldn't be oriented, I shouldn't be, what should I say, doing it only from my perspective, but to see India as a whole and with all its plurality, multilingualism, multi-religiousness, multiculturalism, etc. So I was wondering how to do it. So I wanted to say, as far as India is concerned, probably some other esteemed speakers might have mentioned it, then forgive me. I wanted to say the very first Indian reception of Siddhartha took place in 1922 itself. The occasion was the International Peace Congress of Women's Liga. And I think it is something very appealing that it was in the peace conference that this first text was read first. And we live in a complex, complicated world in crisis where we need so badly peace. And I'm glad that we have this conference, this symposium. I hope it will bring some message. And how did this happen? Hesse held a reading from Siddhartha during this Congress. And the first Indian recipient was Professor Kalidas Nag from Calcutta, Bengal. And he was so fascinated, so overjoyed to listen to such a narrative where it was a kind of, for him, a poem or Indian philosophy and spirituality made into poem. Then the reception of Hesse Siddhartha, we all know, happens through the English translation of Siddhartha, and it brought international attention and appreciation for Siddhartha. Of course, we must think of the climate. This was the hippie movement in America, and the hippie movement, the hippie youth considered this Siddhartha as a modern, as a classic for them, classic work. And Girija has very well showed us the reception in India through the film. And this filming of Siddhartha by Conrad Rooks in 1972, I was trying to find out some impacts from the Indian various readers, listeners or watchers. The Hindi version of this film was received with great enthusiasm by the Indian cinema fans, I have read. It became very popular, especially the Kamala scenes, the kissing scenes. After Kamala's death, many of the persons left the cinema hall thinking that this was the end of the story. That means the end of the love story. I have asked some of the senior literary critical Germanists of those days, and they were of the opinion that they saw this film as a Bollywood kitsch. Well, I put it in front of you. It may be a very light-heartedly said thing, but for India, in any case, this was a reception, a popular reception of that. And then I was looking into many of the translations. Of course, I cannot go into it, then it will become a paper. That is not I'm not allowed to do that. So according to statistics, there are, it seems, 19 languages into which Siddhartha had been translated. And to my surprise, I found that 13 of them are in Indian languages. Most of these are translated from English translation and original German. That's why I was proposing to my colleagues, maybe it is worthwhile to conduct a workshop about the reception through translation in a different way. Well, why I mentioned these copies of translations, because I wanted to know how was the reception, in what perspective. It is very difficult to find or to get the copies of them, and also difficult to see what are the impressions or what they say. So, and I was very glad that Pathak made this very scholarly study of the Marathi translation. I didn't even know that there were 4 words. Yeah. So I found out that there are among these 13 translations, I could collect only copies of 6 Indian languages. They are Hindi, Gujarati, Urdu, sorry, 7 languages: Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Urdu, Tamil, Kannada, and Malayalam. And when I was trying to look into the introductory notes to see how many of these people received Siddhartha. And it varies, the opinions vary. But in any case, summing up these receptions, I can say everyone or every translator, of course, Pathak, forgive me, I have not read Marathi, all versions of translations, but it is from the introductory part I have gathered this, that they say they see that the contradiction or this tension between theory and experience in Siddhartha part 1 and by that they see this, and that is the beginning of the search. And the part 1 shows this tension between tattva and anubhava, or doctrine and experience, theory and experience. In the Indian context, in India, we see mostly, this is what he says, the relationship between music and literature. They compare the difference between theory and practice to that. It is something like this connection. And in India, this is what the translator says, we do not make so much of a hard distinction so that tension is created between theory and experience. It's more important for them is we take it in a very sensitive way, these differences. And the Malayalam translation of Siddhartha, they say that this is a search and finding of a treasure which is hidden and buried in our own self. So this is an inward journey, a journey towards in. And this inner journey, this inward journey seems to be the Indian reception. That means it is a spiritual experience, or it is a literature which conveys or which inspire us to search, to be in search and to find. That is what they say. But at the same time, not only Buddhist concepts, but also Vedanta reception, they highlight very much. But I want to emphasize, it seems most of them consider this Indian spirituality as an inclusive. That means we do not make exclusive only this one particular religion is right, all others are wrong, or any such thing. But, and Hesse has played a big role, I would say. Did missionaries come to India to spread Christianity? Then I would say Hesse with his Siddhartha and Glasperlenspiel, the great missionary, the Asian missionary. And we can see it also, all the religions, most of them have become now globally well known with many global followers. And one more translator, that means the Urdu translation, I have to mention, Adhika, that his name is Yaqub Yawar from Benares, translated into Urdu in 1982, and the second edition in 2000. 500 copies were sold. And he, being a Muslim, also emphasizes the interreligious and the interspiritual aspect or the message of Hesse's Siddhartha. And I think this inclusiveness and this interaction and this interreligious dialogue, and this dialogue is in interspirituality is, I would say, needed very much in our India and elsewhere. I would say globally needed, and also the search for peace we need. This is enriching and encouraging to get such a message, and that is what I always found in Hesse. And for this particular aspect, that means the all-inclusiveness and not so rigid, but endlessly open, and to search and to have the chance to enrich ourselves from every religion, every philosophy, and all other ideas. That is what I wanted to say. That I can only say, let India remain a highway land for all, and this all-inclusiveness. West müde or an Indian müde, let's all become to some extent world müde, so that we may search and we may find. And let us work for peace. That is all I can say. And that is what I learned from Siddhartha's, Hesse's Siddhartha. And I would tell all of my friends, teachers, as well as students, let us think, whether it is Western or Indian or any such thing, let us see the interaction. Let us keep our windows open for all ideas. And besides, go beyond thought. That is what Hesse hints at when he says, Befreiung von Denken, Befreiung von Denken.
Thank you very much, Professor Finjais. I'd now request Professor Ingo Cornelis to share his perspectives with us. And I would request all the panelists to just, restrict themselves to 5 minutes so that everybody gets a fair chance to speak. Yes.
Will do. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation, and greetings from a ice cold northern England. I'm very envious of those of you who can be in Mumbai at the moment. Professor Bhatti said Hesse had an odd existence, and I think Hermann Hesse is very difficult to put into a box, and Siddhartha even more so. So I was thinking he is also very difficult to sell as in an academic world. In Germany, we had that endless debate between Volker Michels and Marcel Reich-Ranitzky. In the UK, I remember when I first came to this country and talked about my interest in Hermann Hesse, that I got a very scathing response from her. Oh, Hermann Hesse, he's an author for old men, isn't he? And kind of just sort of dismissed him as certainly second rate. And I think that's still the case. So what I'd like to talk about very briefly is maybe Hermann Hesse and Siddhartha in my own practice over the last 20 years. It's been pretty much exactly 20 years ago that in October 2002, in October 2002, we had the first academic conference in Mainz in Germany on Hermann Hesse, the very first one. And a month later, I co-organized a conference in London. And you can read up on that in the Hermann Hesse Heute publication. Then as an editor of the companion to Hermann Hesse that came out in 2009, I was honored to include Adrian Sia, his perceptive chapter on Siddhartha. And Sia reviewed the interpretation of the novel in international Hesse scholarship. He critically discussed the 4 English translations. Dr. Weidemann was asking about that earlier today. And also the respective introductions that are very important. And he also examined the similarities between Hesse's message as expressed in the novel and some tenets of Zen Buddhism. So it's a very short chapter, but it's very readable. I also edited a special issue of the journal Literatur für Leserinnen. It's issue 1, 2015, on the theme of innocence and experience in the works of Hermann Hesse. And there I have included John Hughes' essay on time and experience in Hesse's Demian in Siddhartha. And if you're interested, the issue is available open access at the new Frankfurt website. So if you look at Literatur für Leserinnen, properly gendered with a colon, then you'll find it, and you can scroll down and find the whole issue open access. In terms of teaching, I teach an introductory module on first-year students on world literatures. And my lecture on Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha is I take it as an example for a Bildungsroman and also as a case study for transcultural and transcendental journeys. So we've already seen a picture by him. The Sri Lankan but Gulf-based artist Yayanta Gomez has produced beautiful watercolor paintings of Siddhartha, which helps students to visualize the stages of the journey. And you can access my presentation if you Google my name, Siddhartha, and Prezi, P-R-E-Z-I, you know, the different presentation tool. These are absolutely wonderful. And I'm thinking when we're all involved in teaching Hesse, visualizing these images, that really brings it to life. I currently help a final year student here in Leeds with his dissertation. Hello, Ari. He aims to compare the 4 English translations of Siddhartha and research the stories behind them beyond the publisher's obvious profit motive. Speaking of translations, in March of this year, my department, together with Centers for Translation Studies and World Literatures, organized an online workshop with Susan Bernowski, whose 2006 translation of Siddhartha is generally excellent, even though, and I got a little fight with her because I have yet to see a convincing rendering of Hesse's beautifully formulated Zum Ziele strebte der Fluss in the chapter Om. How you translate that into English seems to be beyond the best translators there. With, as mentioned before, with Dr. Neil Cunningham in Tokyo, I'm the editor of Hermann Hesse's Global Impact, and this volume will engage with current debates on world literature and how Hesse's texts have traveled around the world. And we're using B. Venkat Mani's concept of bibliomigrancy for that. The volume will include the chapter on the fascinating story of the amateur translator Hilda Rosner, who decided to translate Siddhartha into English off her own bat in the late 1940s. I believe her translation was the one that was used for the first rendering of Siddhartha into an Indian language, Telugu, in 1957. By the way, we are still urgently looking for a chapter on Hermann Hesse's impact in India. So we are looking forward to hearing from interested colleagues. Finally, to conclude, I think it is up to us to keep Hesse research alive and fresh. And as far as I'm concerned, his Indian tale, Siddhartha, is as relevant today in a time of perma-crisis as it was 100 years ago. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd just like to add to, in context to translation that you mentioned, that the Hermann Hesse Society in Kerala, Talisheri, that is where his maternal grandfather worked, in the Basel mission, they have commissioned translations into all major Indian languages. So Hesse has been translated. In fact, they're also working on a translation into Sanskrit, Hesse now. I'd request now Dr. Rosie Singh to take the mic, please.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you, Meher, and thank you also, Vibha, for inviting me and for organizing this program. I come straight to the point because I don't want to encroach on other people's time. Actually, some of the things I thought I would say have already been said. So anyways, see how this was the first novel I read in German. in my BA days. And I thought, my God, what this is what I have got myself into. It was really tough to read it at that time. But a few things from that novel have stayed with me. Not everything, but a few things. And today I would read the novel, Professor Kushal today morning mentioned about various stations in his Siddhartha's life, and he refers to, he calls it exodus. So I don't know why he used that term. He has his reasons, but I would prefer to use the term borders. How the protagonist crosses borders, abstract borders, not physical borders. He crosses from his parental home, leaves all the comforts behind, and crosses over the border, enters the forest, lives 3 years abstaining from everything. There's a sentence I would like to quote. He says he wants to be empty of desire, empty of dreams, empty of joy and sorrow. So the protagonist perceives every desire as a negative emotion that needs to be silenced. And this extreme way of life goes on for 3 years. And then finally he realizes, no, this is not it. And he again crosses the border, enters the city. So from the sacred world, he enters the profane world, but he later on calls the Lustgarten. So there he gets to know women, one particular woman. He learns trade, he learns how to play dice. He learns all the tricks that you need to survive in the world. But ultimately, he again gets tired of this life. And again, he crosses the border. There's a what he calls awakening is again, there is another awakening. He crosses this Maya, what he calls Maya and Lustgarten and all in the end. So he goes to the river, settles down there, and becomes ferries people to and fro. But this is the river I would not call as a border. The river is more a space in between. I would say between the profane and the sacred world. So in this in-between space, he goes to and fro from bit of detachment, bit of attachment, a bit of some temptation, some renunciation. What you can use n number of terms. Nearness and distance are the Dionysian and the Apollonian. So between all these dualities, he fluctuates to and fro, and ultimately finds peace in the in-between space, in the mäßiges, what he calls a mäßiges Leben. And it is this in-between zone of mixing that is where he becomes the master of his destiny. And this metamorphosis was not quick, it was very slow, it was gradual, and it takes time. And this is my reading of the text. I don't see it as a religious discourse. I don't, that is the framework, Buddhism or Hinduism, that may be the framework, but novel is not really about any particular religion or Christianity. I think it's more existential. I would like to just quote one line out of this novel, which is my favorite line. And Meher Booth had quoted it in her introduction, and I thought, my God, she's said it. So anyways, this line is, Ich kann denken, ich kann warten, ich kann fasten. So this line comes 4, 5, 6 times in the novel. And whenever somebody asks him in the city, what are your skills? He always quotes this line, Ich kann denken, ich kann warten, ich kann fasten. And then the other protagonists say, is that all? Nothing else. But I think it's a very profound statement that till the right things come to you, you lead a frugal life, you can wait. and that waiting you spend developing your thought. And this, I think this line has kind of, it has to some extent shaped me also, because for a long time I had, I went through a tough time, and I always thought, okay, Ishkan Bhattan. So, we all read things, novels in a different way. And I think this line is more about patience, how to, wait, be patient. And this philosophy or this thing is neither Oriental nor Western. And one last point, I think turn of the century in Europe was full of paradoxes. There was, on one hand, hope, and on the other hand, there was anxiety for the future. On the one hand, there were art movements that moved from realism away towards abstraction, towards surrealism, expressionism. But at the same time, there were writers who were still continuing with the romantic tradition, what we would call neo-romantic tradition, whether it was Hesse or Rilke. So they continued with the same old tradition, engaging with the questions of metaphysics in their own way. So the metaphysical concerns could not be entirely driven away in the beginning of 20th century, although it was a very different kind of literature was being written. And, there was the secularism, move towards secularism, there was Marxism. But at the same time, these ideas, also metaphysical issues, continued. There was Gibran, there was Tagore in India. And as far as, I think, instead of romanticizing Hesse, the novel does have a few weak passages, which seem today, from today's point of view, a little exaggerated or maybe kitsch or old-fashioned. If kitsch is a strong word, but maybe a little old-fashioned. But I would still say it's a masterpiece. And like I said, it's not my favorite, but it is one of my favorites. And not because it refers to India. That's not the criteria at all. But I feel it does explore some the human condition and human predicaments, and that one can, if you read it with an open mind, you may find something interesting in it even today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rosie. Now I request Swati to briefly share her perspectives with us. We have less than 10 minutes and we have 3 speakers. So please, we will overstretch. Each one will get 5 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you, Mumbai. Thank you to the entire organizing team. I will briefly kind of segment my statement, and I thank the team for allowing me to take the liberty of making it a personal statement. So Siddhartha then is my first part, and by then I don't mean anything else but my personal journey. So this Siddhartha as experienced and perceived by me then. So when I visited Germany for the very first time as a young student, something between 18 and 19, I didn't even realize that I was making a blunder by admitting that I have not visited the Osho commune. In those days, it was called Bhavan, in spite of coming from Pune, and that I have not read Siddhartha as yet. So at least one chance I got to close this Bildungslücke by enrolling myself into the MA program at Pune University, and Siddhartha was a compulsory reading. And my first reaction, I will be extremely honest, also something that I took away from the novel, to be honest and to say what you want to say, was this realization of not belonging to the fan following of Oh Siddhartha, Oh Hesse community, because the reality portrayed in this novel was really not my reality. And neither did I have any direct encounter with the Europe fatigue, Europamüdigkeit, or an escape from the rational, modernist, etc. approach to life. Then I realized, as one delved deep into the Siddhartha reception and the entire aesthetics of reception of Siddhartha, and the entire movement that was attached to it in the name of, let's say, Indological texts in their socio-historical, cultural, and above all, political perspective, it was clear that Siddhartha was a major influence on the Orientalist discourse. That journey need not be elaborated here. I will be very obedient to what Jyoti said. I will be brief, because I'm sure those experiences are shared and thoughts are shared by almost each one of us here, at least from the Indian side of German studies scholars, because we have kind of thrived and grown up in that discourse. And yet, the reason Siddhartha as a book continues to remain interesting is mainly because of its individualistic or the core of individuation. That kind of zest to tread on a path entirely of one's own, even if it meant undergoing hardships, was worth taking a note of. The way Siddhartha says to Govinda, for example, I quote, "Du weißt, lieber, dass ich schon als junger Mann dazu kam, den Lehren und den Lehrern zu misstrauen und ihnen den Rücken zu wenden." Zitat Ende. Was something one wanted to say aloud for a long time and simply did not either dare to say so or did not get any opportunity to say so. But it was at least some kind of a vicarious pleasure to hear it from the protagonist's mouth. Then I come to Siddhartha now, so the me in now phase. If one wants to describe Siddhartha's relevance today in one word, I think it was Shashwati Mazumdar who said it in the morning, it is symbolic. And after, it is something like one has spent some time in a cabinet of mirrors while reading texts by German authors on India or Western authors, to kind of put it in a nutshell, one realizes that Siddhartha continues to retain its referential value. It forms that layer of palimpsest-like structure which gets overwritten again and again, again and again. It was already mentioned in the morning that Siddhartha in particular and Hesse in general, through his writings on India, offered a point of departure to many of the authors. And I mean, each one of us can just list them without any trouble. Hesse had a unique position, we must mention it specially, where he did not want to submerge in the mythos called India as a platform of salvation. But the fact remains that he contributed a lot to the very emergence of this mythos. And then in the third segment, I would like to call it Siddhartha every now and then. I particularly want to thank our young scholar Satish Yatin for his presentation on Hesse's discontent today. I mean, the discontent in Siddhartha today, and referring to Hesse as a go-to self-help author or self-help guru to all corporate CEOs in crisis. The number of Hesse quotations, which I have seen being used by multiple PowerPoint presentations as some sort of a quick and sure-shot remedy to all corporate crisis, is appalling and amusing at the same time. The path carved by the protagonist Siddhartha in the novel was hailed by multiple generations in Europe and the world over as a non-conformist path of self-discovery. And now this same novel finds itself trapped in the function or a role of giving instant solutions. It is definitely not something what Hesse meant when he wanted his protagonist to be a thirsty man. He could have also called him hungry man, going by the quotation mentioned twice, once by Meher and then by Rosie. Ich kann denken, warten und fasten. But he terms his protagonist as a thirsty man, a Durstender. But unfortunately and ironically, Siddhartha as a novel, as a literary work, even though it is hailed as a masterpiece by many, it has become something like a bottle of mineral water, preferably with the label of the best sellable brand. And I was kind of just thinking that will be the last sentence in my short presentation. When a human being turns 100, one normally wonders, oh, what must have kept him so healthy that he actually became 100? And when a book like Siddhartha turns 100, then sometimes a question that one needs to ask is, what ails the societies today that we still find Siddhartha relevant, and want to discuss how this work has changed or is capable of changing the society today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Swati. Nishant, would you please take the mic now?
Yes. Can you hear me, Jyoti?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Can you see me? Because the camera is not working from my end.
Yeah.
There is some problem
none
with
of
the
us can see you. I mean,
yeah. There is a problem with the
you.
video. I checked,
Right.
so it is not working. So you have to just listen to me. So first of all, thank you, Jyoti, for the introduction, and thank you, University of Mumbai German Department, for this opportunity to talk about Hesse and Siddhartha. So now I will go back to my encounter with Hermann Hesse. Strangely, as an MA student, I've read Hermann Hesse, but it was not Siddhartha. At Center of German Studies, I read Steppenwolf. And Steppenwolf was my first. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then in one of them in Delhi, there was a meeting with some German students, and one German student had Siddhartha with him, and he asked me, "Hast du Siddhartha noch nicht gelesen?" And I was like, "Why? Du musst es gelesen haben." And he gave me his copy of Siddhartha, which he was carrying with him to India as a gift to read. So then I read Siddhartha as a gift from Germany to understand why I was kind of, motivated, or suggested to read the book. And years later, I thoroughly enjoyed the book, although it was also very difficult to understand the underlying philosophy, the thoughts behind it. But as Rosie mentioned, those few sentences kept recurring in those throughout the book. Ich kann fasten, ich kann warten. So those were the things which, became very important for me those days. And that was also the time when then I researched about, that was the time when I read Steppenwolf, and then I read about Hesse, that this book became a cult classic, especially in the 60s and the 70s, amongst a generation which was also reading at that time Jack Kerouac's On the Road. So these were the kind of cult classic books which were enjoyed in the 60s, 70s generation. Years later, few years ago, I recently rediscovered reception of Siddhartha in Indian English literature. That is the novel of Anita Desai, Journey to Ithaca. And that is out of the many books which she refers at the beginning of the novel, Hesse's Siddhartha and Journey to India are the two books which she refers. And this book plays a very crucial role in Anita Desai's work, Journey to Ithaca, where one of the protagonists, Matteo, who is Italian, is home tutored by a German tutor. His German tutor's name is Fabian. And Fabian, to teach him German, also tells him that you should start reading Siddhartha. And after reading Siddhartha and Journey to India by Hermann Hesse, Matteo develops this great urge in him to visit India. And then he starts following Siddhartha's life, so as he wants to stay away from his family, and he wants to seek the spirituality of the East. And this brings him to India. So Journey to Ithaca also, if we look at it, is also a very crucial point in the title, because Ithaca, as usual, it symbolizes the journey of the Greek figure Odysseus, and the Anita Desai's book starts with the Kawafi, C.P. Kawafi's poem Ithaka. C.P. Kawafi was a Greek poet, and the poem starts, I would just read the poem. As you set out for Ithaka, hope the voyage is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Lystrigonians and Cyclops, angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. Always keep Ithaka fixed in your mind. To arrive there is your ultimate goal, but do not hurry the voyage to all. It is better to let it last for long years and even to anchor at the isle when you're old. Rich with all you have gained on the way, not expecting that Ithaka will offer you riches. Ithaka has given you a beautiful voyage. Without her, you would never have taken the road, but she has nothing to give you now. And if you have found her poor, Ithaka has not defrauded you. With such great wisdom you have gained, with so much experience, you must surely have understood by then what Ithakas mean. So in this, coming back to Hesse's, my reading of Hesse with Ithaka. Hello?
Thanks. Could you just wind up fast?
Oh, okay, Jyoti. Okay. Yeah. So my reading of this Siddhartha's, let's say, contemporary reflection in Indian English literature also shows that this concept of conflict is very much embedded in the in Siddhartha in the novel, because this is the one aspect which in today's keynote address was also underlined, where the speaker spoke about die Krise des Buches als die Krise des Autors, and he talked about the aspect of Fluss and Exodus and am Fluss die Vollendung. So this journey, the voyage, which is basically a point of a journey of full of conflicts and full of challenges, full of self-discovery, is something which is even today it's relevant, because as I have heard all the presentations till now, and all the presentations have somewhere at some point of time also underlined implicitly these conflicts and these challenges which are there inherent in the novel, Siddhartha. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Nishant. Now, Shruti.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So it was difficult to understand and to interpret Siddhartha today. I mean, Siddhartha now and then, when Vibha, you asked me to speak, I was like, yes, of course I will speak. And then there was a big void. I did not know what to say. And then I did have something to say. I do have something to say. But as a student, when I read Siddhartha, I was reading it parallel to Goethe, parallel to Faust. Siddhartha was for me the one Suchende, who with the Faustian Drang. The plunge in the river reminded me of the plunge at the end of the Gretchen Tragödie. There were many things, and it was always this Drang, Erkenntnis Drang. It was the need in the seeker, and to say, verweile doch, du bist so schön. And that's precisely what is happening in Siddhartha as well. So there are clear parallels. The influence of Goethe is not to be overlooked. Let's come to me now, as in I as a teacher, I as someone who is close to nature, I still find a lot of things in Siddhartha. And close to nature, speaking of nature and speaking of naturalist materialism, eco-spirituality, environmental studies, there was a very interesting documentary called Voices of the River. The title of this documentary, which was an award-winning documentary, on the traditional owners along the Matuvara Fitzroy River in Australia. So these are a set of Aborigines who want to save their river, the Fitzroy River. And the arguments that they have, the voices of these people, they reminded me of the river in Siddhartha as well. Hemanta Kumar says, Koto dur ar koto dur bolo ma. he refers to the river as Ma, which is not very unheard of. We know Ganges is the mother, Yamuna is the mother, and it is a very, very interesting addition to the whole discourse, I feel, which the text, the Siddhartha text does not have, but I find it very interesting because that's where these aborigines actually connect with the river. Spiritually, culturally, they say the kids will forget the vocabulary of the animals, the biodiversity that actually exists close to the river, and they will not be able to live. And this is a big, big loss, a cultural loss, a huge reserve, a loss of reserves. So that is one very important aspect in which we can actually see Siddhartha, although in Siddhartha, the river as a learning site is a site of learning. And I say that again, because I'm going to connect it to the third observation that I have made and I want to talk about. It is there, it is a metaphor at the same time, and it is a metaphor for self-realization because Siddhartha sees in the river all his past, the future perhaps, and there is a certain kind of a oneness that he experiences. So the river is a mirror for him, but here we see when we talk about eco-criticism and we talk about eco-spirituality, that there is something more to it and that we do need to save our rivers. River as a site of education is also the third point that I want to make. And that actually kind of takes up all the things, and I feel it's a site of learning. Siddhartha, if at all, it is actually a treatise on learning to learn, I feel. Siddhartha as a student, and this would have a triadic model. Siddhartha as a student on one corner of the triangle, the ferryman, Vasudev, and the river. So I see it as a triadic model here of education. And I want to just highlight a couple of things. I found it fascinating to see it this way, that we see Siddhartha as a student, a little precocious to my mind sometimes, arrogant, very perfect. He knows what he's doing. He is in fact even strong enough to actually paralyze the samana who has taught him the style, the art of meditation, or the other siddhis that he has got. He's precocious, and he goes on. He knows everything is fine until, of course, he faces rejection from his own son, and that is where everything kind of crumbles for him. And the river, and he's old now, and the river gives him some kind of comfort. And but let's look at the river as a model and compare it to the educational institutions that we have today. It is very easy to understand it. I am thinking about the teacher, and from the time of Siddhartha. In fact, the questioning of the teacher figure occurs even in Nietzsche himself, in Zarathustra, when he says, "Man vergilt einem Lehrer schlecht, wenn man immer nur der Lernende bleibt." So one is supposed to overcome the teacher's teachings. As a good student, you have to go on. So that's very interesting. That's a Nietzschean thing that I see there. Then he goes on, and the point is that as a student, and then we see historically that we have the hippie movement, and we've got the Beatles coming in and singing "Sexy Sadie, what have you done? Sexy Sadie, you've fooled everyone." And that's where the Beatles come in, and the questioning of the spiritual guru, the questioning, the corruption that has come in the religious discourses, that is already started in modern Europe, because we're talking about sacred sainthood. We're talking about mystic, ohne gottlose mystic. This is the Weimar Republic, where we are talking about the fin du siècle, where this particular discourse is there, very dominant. And I see Siddhartha also a product of it. There's another thing very important, though we keep saying, oh, it's known to us, the text is known. But as Professor Martin Kempchen pointed out today, very, very important, because he has actually done a lot of exchanging, a lot of topsy-turvying with the text, with the Denkmuster of the Indian consciousness, or the religious, or the things that we think are so, isn't so. That's what we say. But actually, he has done. He's played with the Varnashram, the Chatur ashramas, for example. The sequence that you would expect, it's not there. Govinda kisses the forehead of his guru or the teacher. Who kisses anyone to have have revolution. But that's what happens. And these are very interesting, very small little things that are happening. And he's playing with those things. He's experimenting. He has this eclectic mix of values that he's interweaving within his Denkmatrize. So coming back to the education, I see, well, when we're talking about the authority of the teacher, we are not looking anymore at the sage on the stage. We want a ferryman, a teacher as a ferryman who is modest, as Vasudeva. We want a ferryman who can actually help or steer the student and let be. You know, as Heidegger says, let be. Let learn. That's what we do. And that's precisely what's very interesting. And the river, as Rosie rightly said, and I totally agree with you, is the in-between space of an educational institution, the university, where we can descend as students, where we can learn, where all our past activities, all our history, past, future, present, they all come together somehow, not as OM, but make some kind of a synthesis of knowledge before we pass out of university. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Shruti. You've taken the discussion which was initiated in the morning, has been taken forward, and we have been enriched by a spectrum of perspectives by the panelists from their own personal readings of Hesse's Siddhartha, and as well as the context in which they use it as teachers, as students, and as just readers of the text. I was wondering, the organizers, do we have a time for the audience to, for audience interjections, or should we just wind up? Vibha?
Yes, audience comes first. Yes.
Yes. So now the floor is open to to all the participants who have been here since morning. The discussion is now open for your observations or questions or interjections that you have. But please, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, how many minutes?
Mihir, how much time do we have? Can we have?
We have overshot.
I know, just maybe 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yes. In der Kürze ist die Würze, ne? So sagen wir auf Deutsch. Or any of the speakers want to, like, you know, ask the other panelists anything, or that's also possible. Yeah, there is an audience from the audience, Dr. Helge Weidemann. Yes.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you all of you for this very wonderful panel, sharing your personal reading experiences. Just to maybe set a very broad question now, and I invite answers from anybody who feels they can talk to that specific point. I find it very interesting how there seems to be this tension that came out in many of the talks today, and also in the panel now, between a fascination with Hesse and liking his work, and thinking from the German perspective in particular to learn something about Asia, but also all the opposite. Not liking the book when reading it for the first time, pointing out that the knowledge of Asia and India, and actually also China in particular, was very lacking in Hesse, and so on. So there seems to be, I would think, also from my own experience reading Hesse and now listening to the whole day of presentations and this panel, that there is this fascination with Hesse, maybe also because there seems to be this tension, yeah, not just Volker Michels and Marcel Reich-Ranitzky, but also many of us could argue for hours about our reading experiences and particular points in the works. Does anybody share my feeling on this, that this tension is maybe also what keeps them alive 100 years, especially this book 100 years after it has been published? Thank you.
Would the panelists want to, anybody from the panel or from the audience, respond to this? Well, we have Alexander Phillips to everyone. He says, I came to the symposium to work out this tension.
Well, I just wanted to say, I agree with you, Herr Weidemann. Definitely, there is the tension, and besides, what is appealing is it is a self-discovery. It's a search by oneself. And as many of us already mentioned, it's non-conformity, and especially for our at the present age, where we have to become ourselves grown-ups on our own. And this search and this longing, I think this is not belonging to any particular situation only. It is a human situation as such, existential. That brings the tension too.
Well, Jan, does it answer your
It does, of course.
question,
It goes exactly in that direction. Also, that some people are very open to, so to speak, look for themselves or to resolve that particular tension by reading Hesse, and others are not. So it does speak to that observation that I made, as much as the other participants' chat comment just now. Sorry, Alexander Phillips, yes.
There is a hand raised by Professor Cornliss. Yes, Professor Cornliss?
Thank you. Yes, there is a tension. Hermann Hesse exudes this message of no method, no message, no guru. And at the same time, that's exactly what he is, what he projects. And that's why we have the tension between self-help on the one hand and deep insights on the other. And that's why I think we have these endless biographies. Yeah, every year we get another couple of biographies written. And I think most interestingly is obviously Volker Michel's current edition of Die Briefe. So we have one more time, we have an extension of how much Hesse actually responded to and took on the mantle and said, I'm not the guru, I'm not the guide, but at the same time, giving moral and ethical guidance to so many people. I mean, 40,000 readers, yeah? I'm struggling to say that this is a moral and ethical influencer, yeah, because that's not what I mean and that's not what I want to say. But to a certain extent, if we think 100 years ago, yeah, certainly, or 120 years ago, he was a co-editor of a journal. He was constantly in the newspapers. He was constantly out there advising. So I see the tension, and whether that in academic circles, whether that will keep him alive, that's a different question.
Thank you very much for your interjection. Anyone else? Well, if there aren't any more questions or other interjections, then I think I would like to thank all the panelists and all the participants who've been here since morning for this wonderful discussion and carrying forward the issues that were raised through these various papers we have been listening to by the various presenters. Thank you very much. And now we will go over to the next agenda. To the next item. Thanks very much.